Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hope all of you are doing well out there in the listenership and the viewership of allpointstv.com. I'll get it right this week. I said last week that we were another studio going back to the olden days. We're now the allpointstv.com network as we continue to move along and hope to bring you along with us as we make more and more progress here at the studio. And our name change just shows the growth that we've been trying to reach, and we're not finished yet. But we have transitioned from the old network we were once affiliated with, and we're now a new network. And we are changing things every day here at the studio, hoping to bring you the kind of programming that you have come to expect from the studio, and we will continue that particular progress. We're always glad to have you with us as we attempt to go back sometimes in the past and bring you up to speed. I know there are a lot of things breaking in the news right now, but we've committed for the next couple of our programs to continue the discussion we started last week where we were talking about the foundational aspects of the Constitution, and we want to look particularly at the banking and monetary system of the United States, going back to the very beginning points of where we will ascribe to what was taking place in 1787. Last week I was saying that one of the persons who I don't think has gotten all the credit that he deserves is Alexander Hamilton. I think Hamilton is the pivotal personality at the Constitutional Convention, and I think that Hamilton really is the person that is intellectually behind the foundation of the country itself. I think at some point that he becomes more of an important figure than was George Washington, although I would have to say George Washington becomes the primary figure on the scene once he becomes President of the United States. But prior to that, since Washington doesn't come on the scene as president until 1789 with his election at the behest of the states, where Washington got 69 of the electoral votes. And we'll talk about that as we get into the program today in terms of what happened that would have brought that about. But you have to go back to a time period before that, and I think you have to talk at that point about the role played by Alexander Hamilton. Last week I said that of the 85 Federalist Papers that were written basically by three different persons, a team of three that had been assembled by Alexander Hamilton, who had asked a number of people to join him in defending what had happened at the Constitutional Convention in 1787 in Philadelphia. That is, say, they have gone beyond their charge in terms of having arrived at Philadelphia, which was to revise the Articles of Confederation, but having gotten there and realizing that the document was so flawed that revision would have amounted to changing the whole document, they decided to really abandon the Articles of Confederation and draw a new document up in its place. And we even hear that in the preamble to the Constitution, where it says and starts off with the words, "We the people of the United States," having started out saying we the states, rather than we the people of the United States, changing that to we the people in order to form a more perfect union. And the question becomes then, how could they have done that under the Articles of Confederation? They decided that that was prohibitive, if not downright impossible, and therefore the decision was made at the convention, not having gone there with the idea of overthrowing the Articles of Confederation, but deciding that later to do so, they would throw the document out and then bring a new document in its place. And the intent was to form a more perfect union, which would mean then they have to strengthen that which was a fault of the Articles, which was that it had weakened the central government to such an extent it could not act as a umbrella part of the structure that would maintain order underneath it where the states would be located. In order to bring that about, you would have to therefore have the states, which had been very much about not relinquishing its own sovereignty to a strong central government, since they had come from underneath that structure with King George III, the Parliament, and in England, with England. They did not want to at first do that, but then after the Shays Rebellion in 1786, where Massachusetts had a rebellion on its hands and there wasn't a central government in place strong enough to intervene to resolve that problem, it was pretty much Massachusetts' problem. I think the states had to and did understand the gravity of the danger they were in by having so weakened the federal government it could not respond to problems in each of the individual states. So at the convention, that problem has to be fixed, where we have to relinquish some of the power that the states, jealous of their own sovereignty and also the power that sovereignty would have assumed, have to now give some of that power to create a stronger structure at the federal level. And so at the convention, to create a strong federal government, which was not the case under the Articles, it requires the states then to give up some of their sovereignty as sovereign states. Really, there were 13 countries in a real sense, rather than 13 states. These were really 13 independent unities. And to create the federal government, to create the United States under the stronger centralized government, they have to relinquish some of their sovereignty as states and give that voluntarily to the federal government, making it stronger, but not necessarily saying that the states have no control of the structure, since the states are the creators of the structure. That question is going to linger around for 74 years after the Constitution is in fact drawn up in Philadelphia. And we're going to have a real question raised in 1860, when states led by South Carolina are going to put forth the notion that they had voluntarily relinquished some of their power at the Constitutional Convention, and now that it behooved them to reclaim that power to the point that they want to succeed as a individual unity with the authority to do so, because the framing of the Constitution was done voluntarily and the relinquishing of the power was done voluntarily, and now they want to relinquish their agreement and to withdraw from the association. Their claim was that they had the right to do so, and that will be the basis of what we now call the Civil War, which was not a civil war, but a war over the question of whether or not the states can succeed from the union that they had formed in 1787. The point I want to make here, though, is that Hamilton is there at the foundational moments of the country. Without his role, I don't think that we would have had the Union in the first place. I really think that Alexander Hamilton's role has been underestimated, and I don't see too many of the persons I have contact with at the university level. They really put a lot of emphasis upon Alexander Hamilton, and I think rightly we put an emphasis upon George Washington's role, because without George Washington, I think there's another moment in which what happened to create this unity and maintain it would not have been possible without George Washington's role. But I think Alexander Hamilton's role is primary prior to that. And it is Hamilton, through now having to defend what they had done in Philadelphia, is going to have to defend it, because some states are not on board with this arrangement. Some of them are fearful of what has happened at this convention, and they know that those persons that met there have gone beyond the charge for which they were sent to Philadelphia, and they are really suspicious of what has happened behind those closed doors. And whenever you're behind closed doors, you are raising a suspicion of what is going on, because people are not privy to the conversation, don't know how you arrived at the conclusion that you arrived at, do not have a purview, and we're not privileged to understand the deliberativeness that went into making the decisions that were made, and therefore it raises questions about the propriety of those decisions. So there are a lot of questions that have been raised by what has now been given to the states, because after you have drawn up the proposal for the Constitution itself calls for the process to be amended by the states. That means that each of the 13 colonists have to look it over, and 9 of them, which is 2/3, would have to ratify the document. And there are some states that are more primary than others. Certainly New York will be one of those states. And so Alexander Hamilton, who's from New York, is really setting upon the responsibility upon his own shoulders to take the defense of the Constitution to New York, his own state. He's trying to defend it in New York, because without New York buying into it, I don't think that this will in fact work. So we have to explain to those that are suspicious of the document and think that it might be nothing other than a warmed up version of what they've left, and it will create the same problems that they fought the revolution over, is now up to Hamilton to bring New York aboard, although it would take 9 states. Without New York being one of the 9, then the ratification of the Constitution really doesn't carry the same weight. Hamilton writes 59 of the Federalist Papers. And the father of the Constitution, you know that person to be James Madison, writes 29 of those. And then John Jay, who had rheumatism, as I said last week, and was sickly and wasn't able to participate in the level at which he wanted to participate, did what his expertise allowed him to do, which was a writing area that he had most of his background, and that was in the area of foreign affairs. John Jay had shown his genius in that regard at the treaty that ended the Revolutionary War in 1783. It was John Jay who pretty much single-handedly negotiated the peace treaty with England in Paris to end the war that had lasted, if you dated at the point of the Declaration of Independence, lasted from 76 to 1783. But he wrote 5 of the documents. So 59 of the Federalist Papers defending the Constitution written by Alexander Hamilton, 29 written by James Madison, the father of the Constitution, because of the role he played in terms of framing the concepts that went into the Constitution, and then the 5 by John Jay, who would write 5 of those essays, all of them going into the papers in New York. Mainly that's where the argument is being lodged, because they need New York. Although they had 8 states that pretty much ratified it one after the other, and so in going to write the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton has asked his runners for example, there was one of his runners in New Hampshire, and he's asked the people in New Hampshire, we got 8 states aboard here in terms of ratifying the Constitution, and if we can't convince New York to ratify the Constitution by the arguments we put forward in the essays, maybe we can get them to endorse it through the backdoor approach by them saying it's a done deal and a fait accompli, and if they recognize that they're going to be outside the mix, whether they ratified or not, then maybe that will in fact bring them into an agreement to join into the ratification process. So he has runners in New Hampshire, and he's told them that if they ratify New Hampshire as a ninth state, and we'd have the 2/3, then we want you to send a runner so we would know that that ratification has occurred, and we can use that as another hammer to get New York aboard. And of course, Virginia has not yet endorsed it either. So when New Hampshire endorsed it, that would be a ninth state, and it did eventually do so. But then you probably need a little bit more leverage with Virginia, which is a pivotal state also. And so later on, during these deliberations, and while New York is in fact assembled for the purpose of ratifying the Constitution, it is now known that Virginia has also come aboard. So now we got 10 states, but we still don't have New York, and North Carolina has not come aboard. And Rhode Island, which would be the last state to endorse the Constitution, they are not aboard. But New York is pivotal because of the size of the state and its importance to the unionization that they're trying to bring about, having thrown out the document under which the 13 colonies had come together under a confederation, a voluntary association of states. So now Virginia is on board, so that makes 10. And when New York goes to the convention, it goes there where Hamilton is at a disadvantage. George Clinton, who is the governor of New York, is against the Hamilton attempt to bring about ratification, and he's not on board. So he got 49 of the delegates going to Plowsy, I think was where it was held, for where the state convention is being held in New York. Don't forget, each state holds its own convention, and it will decide whether or not in its own convention inside the states will bring about ratification. So they're meeting to decide that question. But Hamilton's at a disadvantage here because 46 of the delegates that are there are pretty much following the line of thought of George Clinton. And George Clinton, being the governor, has a vested interest in the document not being ratified because he has power under the old arrangement. And it's not clear what they would do if Clinton was to endorse the new arrangement, what his role would be under the new agreement. Certainly there would be some question about whether or not he'd be as powerful or whether or not he'd even be governor under the new arrangement. So he is there trying to protect his own political interests. So he has 46 delegates with him, and Hamilton only has 19 delegates that are willing to push for the ratification of the Constitution. So that's a problem that they have in New York. And it's important, since it doesn't seem like that's going to win the day for those who are trying to get ratification of the Constitution in New York, it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to win the rule, so to speak. But now you have something else taking place. You have New Hampshire aboard, the ninth state. You now have Virginia aboard, the 10th state, and that means only 3 states are now outside of the process. And that's New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island. And the question is whether or not they would be on the sidelines. So now the question no longer the arguments in the Federalist Papers as the only thing to consider. Now we have to talk about about the states being excluded from a political alliance where they're outside of the commerce that alliance brings to the table. And that allows you to see why Charles Beard wrote a book called An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution. Because now it's not just a matter of the legal arguments and the constitutional arguments. that are being made about the soundness of what has been put in place, but also there's an economic ingredient in why the ratification will may become necessary. So New York is brought in to the fray because of the economic aspect. It had not been convinced that this was a good deal that was agreed upon in Philadelphia. And they still have some question about it, even though they are coming in under the commercial arrangement that it provides. And they want to have some guarantees, which would be what later on will become the Bill of Rights. They want to have some amendments that will spell out what the federal government can not do through express prohibitions that will be claimed in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that would be placed there 3 years after the Constitution had been ratified, which ratification would have occurred in 1788. So 3 years from that point, in 1791, we have there were 20 amendments that were proposed, 12 of them that came out of the proposals that were made out of the 20, reduced down to 12, and 10 of them were agreed upon and placed in the Constitution as further restrictions upon the federal government's powers. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, press, assembly, petition, religion, and so on, a guarantee that helped satisfy some of the fears about the stronger central government that were given that extra power, but at the same time to limit some of his outreach in terms of having guarantees in place. And 10 amendments will supposedly have answered those fears. But Hamilton's work was cut out for him nevertheless, and I think it's his genius that we have to celebrate if we're going to celebrate the foundation of the country was put in place in the place of the Articles of Confederation. We have to say Alexander Hamilton was a pivotal figure, because without Hamilton, I don't see how that would have, I just can't see how it would have happened. And his genius was what prevailed in the end. In fact, they could not really do too much with the intellectual prowess of Alexander Hamilton, and they tried to bring him down. Clinton and others, the governor of New York, went to personal attacks, which tells you something about the intellectual bearing that they had compared to that of Alexander Hamilton. So they were actually trying to delegitimize Alexander Hamilton through the personal attacks. They couldn't do anything with the intellectual level in which Alexander Hamilton was on. And I don't really see anyone that was close to the intellectual level of Alexander Hamilton. I don't think James Madison would be able to be matched up with that of Hamilton, nor is that James Madison's role. I don't think he could have provided that. Madison's role is something different. So, in other words, Madison's role as a father of the Constitution takes a different bow. He takes a different bow than Alexander Hamilton, who is in a way the father of the second father of the country, in terms of, yeah, we have the Constitution, but we don't have a country underneath its framing. We have the Constitution in place, but we don't have the country's endorsement.
But didn't Hamilton actually want a central bank, though?
At that point, Hamilton does not want the central bank. Not at that point.
Okay,
in fact, Hamilton wants a sound currency. He doesn't even want currency. Hamilton wants a strong monetary. He wants a hard currency.
Yeah, because I mean that's what that's the reason why I have problems with, like, a lot of libertarians would say about Alexander Hamilton is later on he was known to be kind of for behind the central bank idea, and the libertarians, as well as some of the founders. I mean, Jackson opposed the central bank later
Yeah.
too. I mean, he wasn't founder, but that was a big thing. So I was here to talk about that. I
Not
remember
at the beginning,
I
but
re-
you're making a great point.
Yeah.
You're making a great point, John. Hamilton will change his mind. And I see Hamilton equivalent to some of the criticism I've heard in another genre with Clarence Thomas. I was at a meeting, the anniversary of Dr. King's birthday, and they had Professor Gates from Harvard University that spoke in Ann Arbor. And he was chastising Clarence Thomas for being an affirmative action student, quote unquote, as if Clarence Thomas didn't have the brights to get into to Cornell, and affirmative action was the way he got there. Well, let me accept that. Let me accept that as true. I don't know if it's true or not. I'll accept it as true. I'll take Gates's point of view. But what Gates criticized Clarence Thomas for was that Clarence Thomas got on the Supreme Court, and all of a sudden Clarence Thomas had changed his mind. He used affirmative action. When he got on the Supreme Court, he, in fact, did not defend it. Well, you see, what you're missing here is something similar to what's missed in Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton is not the Secretary of the Treasury at the point, and his role is not that of the Secretary of Treasury. Hamilton's role is that of getting the Constitution ratified. He is not Secretary of the Treasury. There are some reason to believe that he wants to be in that role, but he's not in that role yet. And the colonists have had a history with fiat currency. Let me read something to you out of this book here by a person who has done a brilliant job. I don't agree with some of his conclusions because he's a conspiratorialist in the larger sense of the term, where I do see conspiracy, but I don't see it being comprehensive where there's the same group conspiring on everything that's going on. Certainly there's conspiracy going on because people conspire all the time. So conspiracy is nothing new. But this idea that you have a conspiratorial group that's controlling all the conspiracies, is out there, that's not what's going on. And okay, it's a long conversation, and maybe we'll have a chance down the road. But I want to get to Jackson before we get off the air today. But here's what Hamilton is dealing with. People that do not want to have a fiat currency because they've tried that. They tried that in the colonists when they had to pay off the Revolutionary War, and what they were doing was just printing money, churning paper out there, and counterfeiting the currency and causing inflation. So Hamilton doesn't want to have that problem, because if they come in under the idea of creating a fiat currency, I can tell you right now, Hamilton's problems of getting the Constitution ratified is much more prohibitive and more difficult. In fact, it's not going to happen. And I want to read something that is in the book by G. Edward Griffin, in the book called, and it's a remarkable book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, A Second Look at the Federal Reserve. And here's what Griffin says on page 315 of this book. Thomas Paine, although not a delegate to the convention, had written the previous year, meaning 1786, that he was strongly opposed to fiat money, which he called counterfeiting by the state. In other words, fiat currency, as they found out during the Revolutionary War, trying to pay for that war by just printing money, they found out that what really it is two things. It's counterfeiting the currency, and it's also a hidden tax, because the way the tax happens when you have fiat currency is taxes are taken out through the backdoor approach, where it causes a rise in prices, where you can't trace the tax to the government creating the currency. In other words, it's a hidden tax, and you pay it at the store. And you can't see the government having caused it because the government is printing money that's a fiat currency. Well, they had tried that. And if Hamilton had tried that, John, at the convention, that Constitution would not have been ratified because all those states had already gone through that. But Hamilton will change his mind later on, just like Clarence Thomas changed his mind when he got to the Supreme Court, according to Professor Gates. But the roles of the two men had changed. Hamilton was not Secretary of the Treasury, and Clarence Thomas wasn't a member of the Supreme Court. And his job at the time he was in college is not to, in fact, interpret the Constitution, but to take advantage of any opportunity out there for him to go to school. And I don't blame him for doing that. I would have faulted him, I'm talking about Clarence Thomas here, if Clarence Thomas had gotten onto the court and then became blinded by what had occurred in his own personal case and did not understand that that had nothing to do with his role as a member of the Supreme Court. I think you should have to give Clarence Thomas credit. You can't say because he took advantage of a program, therefore he should not have taken his constitutional oath of office seriously, because then that makes a hypocrite of the man. He's not a hypocrite for taking advantage of a program. He didn't create the program was there. He took advantage of it, if that's what he did. And I'm not so sure that he did that. That's a proposition that is in fact made. I don't know where the claim, I like to see the documents of the claim. But if anybody thinks that Clarence Thomas is not fit to be on the court because he doesn't have the intellectual matter that Thurgood Marshall supposedly had, I can just tell you this, go read the transcript of the Brown case, and you're going to be surprised because there's not, the argumentation made in that court case was not made by Thurgood Marshall as far as any legalisms. The Supreme Court in 54 is making sociological arguments, not legal arguments. And the legal arguments are being made not by Thurgood Marshall, but by Felix Frankfurter. And I dare anybody to go and read the transcript of the Brown cases I have read and was shocked by it, that Felix Frankfurter kept Frankfurter kept intervening in the arguments and kept guiding Thurgood Marshall to the arguments that the court needed him to make in order for the court to make a predetermined decision. They had nothing to do with the arguments that were placed before the court. The Supreme Court had already determined to to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. And anybody that wants to read the book called Simple Justice by, is that Klugman's? Yeah, that's Klugman's book. Go read the book called Simple Justice and read the background where they had decided to make that ruling. So I think we have to get out of here with this idea that Clarence Thomas is not fit to be on the Supreme Court because all he is a clone of Souter, and who's the other person they claim that he's nothing but a stooge of Souter. There's another conservative there, what's his name, on the court, and they say that he's just another clone of them, and all he's doing is parroting what they're saying. Anybody that's read Clarence Thomas's arguments on the court, you know that's not true, because when Clarence Thomas writes his own briefs where he might side with the majority, but he has his own reasons for doing so, go read his briefs and see the brilliance of his briefs, and then compare them to anything that's written by Thurgood Marshall. It's not even a comparison in terms of the intellectual prowess of Thomas compared to Thurgood Marshall. And anyone that says otherwise, I tell you what I want you to do, prove it. That's your argument, but that does not mean the argument is backed up by the factual record, and you can't back that argument up because you don't know the Brown case, and that which is put out here does not represent what really occurred. So Hamilton, going back to Hamilton, Hamilton has been accused of uh, being at the time of the convention, of not being a sound money person. That's a change in his position when he becomes the Secretary of the Treasury. At this point, though, he's a hard money person. And I want you to look at this in the Constitution. Because in the Constitution, in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, here's what it says. It says, the Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, of the coin money, and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. Now, we're not talking about fiat currency here, paper dollars and paper currency, because you can't weigh it. What is the bills are all 6 inches wide. You know, that's a Masonic, influence there, because of the Masonic basis of the framers were the first 6 presidents up till John Quincy Adams were all Masons. And so there's some Masonic influences in the structure of the United States. You can even see that in the Washington Monument, which has 555 stones in it. That's an imitation of where they thought the Masons thought that, or rather George Washington Mason thought that their order went back to Masonic order, which is based upon Egypt, when the Masonic order was based upon some mythical things they had created, and they based some of the myths upon Egypt. And the George Washington Monument was a replica of the obelisk in Egypt because of its misconception, and it has in it 555 stones in it. Not one is the obelisk, which I saw when I was in Egypt. And you can see an obelisk, by the way, in Central Park, New York, called the Alexandrian obelisk, or the Cleopatra's Needle, which is right next to Harlem. That's brought over here during the Rutherford B. Hayes administration. And that would be a single stone. But the Washington Monument has 555 stones in it. If you add 5 plus 5 plus 5, 555, 5 plus 5 plus 5, you get 15. And then you add the 1 and 5, and you get 6. And that gives you the same dimensions of the dollar bill. So there's some Masonic things in the structure of the United States, because of who the framers were in terms of the Masonic order in which they were a part of. It doesn't make a conspiracy. It just means that there was a seeing of the issues similarly by a person that had a studied view of things. And this idea of conspiracy, I cater to the idea of their conspiracy. We conspire all the time. There's not one person on the planet, by the way, who's not involved in a conspiracy. But this idea, what my problem with Griffin is that Griffin has the idea that there's a conspiratorial group that's orchestrating everything that's going on out here. Let me give you an example. I'm kind of off my subject a little bit. But I have to say that I've been watching, going back and watching some of the tapes on the Kennedy assassination. And this idea that Kennedy was killed by a conspiracy, that is true. I mean, there's no doubt about that. The shooters are in the front and the back. But that's a conspiracy to kill the president. That ain't a conspiracy in the room where those conspirators are doing the other conspiracies who are doing everything else out there that's conspiratorial. Those are people that are conspiring to maintain an interest that Kennedy was in fact a threat to. But that's not the same group that's out there conspiring in other arenas. And if there's people that are watching this program, I want you to know that you're conspirators also, because you are conspiring when you pay your bills. I'm conspiring right now to pay my bills. There's some bills that are due, and I'm waiting until I get the money in the bank to pay it, so I'm conspiring to pay this guy until that guy's paid. I mean, it's impossible not to conspire. And everybody does it. But this idea that you have a group that's like the Illuminati, here in the Illuminati, and they're just planning all the things out there. That's not how it happens. And that's the fault I have with Griffin. Griffin goes, and he's willing to too many times conjecture about a new world order, which can be brought into existence because of the group out there just can command this to go in to take place. And there's no group out there that can do that. That's what Ayn Rand is arguing on page 45 of her book called The New Intellectuals. I want to cut the difference though between Ayn Rand's point of view and that of people like Griffin. And the cut the difference between the two is that it's not just cafeteria style conspiratorialists as Ayn Rand says. There are conspiracies. She's right though in saying that the conspiracy that Griffin is imagining is too broad and too large for that to be possible. But she should not dismiss conspiracy as an apparatus in place, because they are conspiracies. And in the Kennedy case, the shooters are from the back. Oswald is not one of the shooters. There is a shooter or shooters on the 6th floor of the school depository, but there are also two shooters in the front of the president and to his right in the Grassy Knoll area. And one of them is Larry Fine. You can go in. Yeah, there are shooters in the Grassy Knoll, and that's why the president goes to the back and to the left. And Larry Fine fires 1/1000th of a second. 2 bullets hit the president simultaneously. That's in the Zapruder film, and that right there proves conspiracy. And there's another conspiracy when that conspiracy takes place, and that is the conspiracy to cover it up. The Warren Commission report is a conspiracy, but that conspiracy is not the conspiracy to kill Kennedy. The conspiracy to kill Kennedy is a conspiracy in which Lyndon Johnson is involved in, and that's been proven by Johnson's girlfriend. But this idea of a mammoth conspiracy conspiring against everything going on, and it's the same network doing all of that, that's not possible. And I want to make that point very clear. Okay, so Hamilton, by the way, is conspiring to get the Constitution drawn up. He's not conspiring right now to create a central bank. But later on, that is going to be Hamilton's quest. But because that's what Hamilton thinks he needs to do and needs to do, because when Hamilton becomes the Secretary of the Treasury, being a central government, strong central government person, the government needs money to do that. And Hamilton is going to change his mind about a strong currency, and he's going to change his mind about what's in this Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, about the coinage of money. You see, what we have to understand here is that whenever you have fiat currency, what you have here is a currency that is worthless. There's no worth in this currency right here. And on this currency, you have these words right here, which tells you that it's worthless, but it doesn't say it in words you can understand it. What the currency says is this right here. The currency says, this note. Now, whenever you see a note, a bank note, car note, house note, or a Federal Reserve note, whenever you see the word note, you have to think in terms of debt, just like you think about debt when you have a car note. So this is a Federal Reserve note. And because it's, and I'm going to talk about this when we get to I think when we get to the 3rd or 4th segment, I'll be talking about why you cannot pay off the federal debt. When I get to the 4th part, you'll see why you can't pay the debt off. But I'll save that. That's going to be later on. You can't see. Look, it's impossible to pay the national debt off. So whenever a politician tells me they're going to pay down the federal debt, he's either talking out of ignorance or he's lying, because you can't pay the national debt off. And I'll tell you why when we get to the fourth segment. I think we'll be finished with it at the fourth segment. I'm not sure yet, because I tend to get off on these other tangential areas, because I want to bring in side points to make it interesting to those that may get burned out or just talking about one particular topic. So I try to go around it and hopefully can come back to it. But right now, what I'm talking about is this right here on this fiat currency, on this paper, on this debt, on this Federal Reserve note. It says here, this note will, well, it doesn't say will. I'll say will. Will is a commanding word. Will is not as strong as shall, but shall is in there too. It says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Now, what the federal government has done here is the federal government has hidden what is really a gun in the room here, because there's a gun in the room. Because what the government doesn't do, it doesn't say shall and will. You will take this paper. That's what the government is saying. This note, in other words, I said a note is debt, right? Car note, house note, bank note, all notes are debt. This note is legal tender. That is to say this. This note, this debt, is made to be taken in exchange of goods because the government says so, and the government has a gun to make you do it. That's what's on this money right here. Now, if you don't think that's on the money because it doesn't say that, you tell me where else there is any need for the government to get involved in making you take something that has value to it. Let's take this right here, and the loaf of bread I paid for yesterday when I went to the store, and I paid 2 of these plus another $50 because the bread now is $2.50 for a loaf of bread because of the printing of these additional dollars, which carries the value of the dollars down, which is a backdoor tax. Why didn't the government tell me that I must take the bread in exchange for this right here? And the reason for that is that the bread has value, and you don't have to make anybody take that, because the bread can be used because it has value, but this doesn't have value. This right here is debt. And when I get to the third or fourth segment, I think it's the fourth segment, we will in fact go into this, which is what they had done during the Revolutionary War, and they had found out the inflationary aspects of it. So when they get ready to draw the Constitution up, they put in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, that the government should have the right to coin money. Therefore, since there's no right to print money, all of these dollars right here are unconstitutional. And Hamilton knows that if that is what they place in that document, with the experience the colonists had to print money, he knows to print money, to print debt is what it is. He knows that's not going to fly. So they put in there the coinage of money, because they had an experience with the printing of money. And if I can find this, I'll read this to you as well to back up what I'm saying here. Here's a statement written by Griffin that proves my point. The War of 1812 was not popular among the American public, and funding would have been impossible through taxes alone. The government chose to fund the war by encouraging wildcat banks to purchase its war debt bonds, and convert them into banknotes, which the government then used to purchase war material. That should be a period there, to purchase war material. Within 2 years, the nation's money supply had tripled, and so had prices. Once again, going back to the during the revolutionary period, once again, the monetary and political scientists had succeeded in fleecing the American public of approximately 66% of all the money they held during that period. Because when you print money, what you're doing is taking value out of the currency. You're counterfeiting the currency. And that's why in the book by Murray Rothbard, it says here that, and I want to read Rothbard's comment, because the government is the only one allowed to counterfeit the currency. And it counterfeits the currency every time it prints additional currency, it's counterfeiting the currency. So let me read this to you by Rothbard in a book called The Case Against the Fed. Here's what Rothbard says. Anyone who tries to print money is engaged in the high crime of quote unquote counterfeiting. Whereas the government may take a benign view of all other torts and crimes, including mugging, robbery, and murder, and it may worry about the quote deprived youth unquote of the criminal and treat him tenderly, saying, well, he's only a teenager. They might have some forgiveness in that. It says that there is one group of criminals whom no government ever coddles. I don't care what your age is. And that group is the counterfeiters. The counterfeiter, he says, is hunted down seriously and efficiently, and he is salted away for a very long time, for he is committing a crime that the government takes very seriously. He is interfering with the government's revenue, specifically the monopoly power to print money enjoyed by the Federal Reserve. Only the federal government can counterfeit the currency, which is why you have to put on the debt, on this currency here, backed up by nothing. It's a fiat currency. There's value of zero, and therefore you put on the currency that the people must take it in exchange, for example, for a loaf of bread. And that's why they have on there, in language you're not supposed to understand, that this note, this debt, I'll interpret that for you, this debt is legal tender. That is to say, this debt is accepted by force to be used as in exchange for goods that have value because the government is making you do it. And that's on the money in terms that are not out in the open. I'm just letting you see how it works. Money can only be coined. It does not exist in paper form unless it's backed up by coins. If it's not backed by anything, then all it is debt. And all the currency in the United States right now is nothing other than debt. There's no dollar bills out here right now that has anything that backs it up. And people were surprised when one of the persons from the Federal Reserve went before the Congress and he said that there is no gold in the Federal Reserve. And the members of Congress were surprised. I mean, why do you think we went off the gold standard in 1971? Why did Nixon do that? And that's a conversation there about, it goes back to the Marshall Plan, and it goes back to Charles de Gaulle, who thought, wait a minute, all these dollars out here through the Marshall Plan, and where are these dollars coming from? All these dollars, he said Europe is paying for its own reconstruction. And they're charging us interest for money out there they created, and we pay, and they charge us to pay for it through interest. So de Gaulle decided in 1959 to ask for the gold. Okay, you print these dollars out here. You say it's backed up by $35 an ounce, $35 for every ounce of gold. He was putting the dollars on and say, give us the gold, and so on and so forth. And they had to give him the gold. And then other states around the world began to make demands upon the gold. And they're making demands on the gold. And eventually the depletion of the gold, because these dollars are out there circulating out here, supposedly backed by by gold, and they took the gold. And Nixon, to stop it, the gold drain, took the U.S. off the gold standard. Why? Because you had $12 trillion out, let me get it right, $12 million more in printed currency, not trillion. Trillion is your national debt now, 18 trillion. In other words, you got $18 trillion out here circulating where there's no gold backing it up. That's why you got the debt. I'm telling you, when we get to this in 2 weeks, I'm going to explain to you why you cannot get rid of the national debt. You cannot get rid of the debt. You see, because this is the debt right here. And to destroy the debt is to destroy the currency. I'll explain that later on. But look, if you remove the debt, in fact, I just paid off a freezer I bought. You know, they give you they give you this 15-month same as cash. Now, you know what I do? I pay it off same as cash, meaning that if you don't pay it off within a period of time, then at the end, they charge you all the interest accrued over 15 months. Okay, I understand that. So they send you a bill for like $28 a month, which means that by the end of the 15-month grace period, you owe probably half the amount of money that you borrowed. So what I do is I understand that what they did to extend me the loan, what they did is that they didn't loan me money, they created money. They didn't loan me any money in the vault, they created money. And loaned me what? They loaned me that which created out of thin air, and they charge you an interest on it. Well, I'm not paying the interest because I understand that they create the money out of debt, and you're paying interest on debt. I understand how it works. So what I did is I sent more money each month, and by the time that 10 months had passed, I paid it off. Let me tell you what happens when you pay the debt off. When you pay the debt off, as I did with the freezer, when I paid it off, cost $750. I paid $750. What they say, dollars. I guess you see in my account. There's really some O's in that in my account. They put in there. They don't put dollars in your account. They put digital numbers in your account. Anyway, I paid it off within 10 months. When I paid the debt off, by paying the debt off, I destroyed the currency at that point. In other words, the $750 that I borrowed, by paying, because it's debt, when I paid the debt off, that destroyed that currency. In other words, that currency only existed because the debt existed. John, do you understand that? John understands it. But you see, you're not supposed to understand that. Now I got to go out there and watch my car now because because that's the hidden hidden fact.
If you pay a credit card off, you're actually considered a deadbeat. Even if you pay your credit card to get that off, you're considered a deadbeat by the credit card companies because they're not getting that interest.
Interest on credit debt. You're
Right.
paying interest on the debt. You see, the reason why you can have a person. Another thing that you can keep in mind here is that when you get a person to go to a creditor for loan forgiveness, and they'll say that we will, in fact, reduce your debt. Now, you got to go and pay him to reduce the debt. Now, they're both in on a scam here because he can go and argue with the person you owe the debt to for loan forgiveness. But I'll tell you this, if you had somebody loaning you money and he can forgive that you got the money and you're not paying him back, if anybody does that, they go out of business. I think we can all agree with that. So he goes in and he argues that on your behalf, you paying him to argue nonsense on your behalf, and he argue that they want this loan to be reduced or be forgiven, and he does that and he charges you a fee for it. Well, there's no money there in the first place. That's why they can forgive it, because the scam is you're paying interest on money that's in fact created. And it's created where? Out of thin air. That's why they can do it. Okay. Let me finish up with one point about Hamilton, bring us back to our central discussion, because there's so many different corridors to it. Hamilton will later on change his mind because now Hamilton is in the government, and the government always needs money, and if it gets his money through taxation directly, then those leaders are out of power because they will in fact be voted out of office. So therefore, by having a bank that you can relinquish the currency to, you can avoid the political consequences. And that's why a central bank is needed. Next, we're going to get into the 4 central banks we've had in the country, with the Federal Reserve being the 4th central bank set up in 1913. Until next time, we want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you will never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.
You gotta have a dream.